Exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly to the force of the moment.
Udit Vera, Messi Shu, Silence, and me, Robert Bolton. A weak signal is something you notice on your radar that you suspect could be meaningful or have critical implications in the futures. We're going to share some of the weak signals on our radar today, talk about whether they are signals indeed of something particularly important or critical, or whether they are merely noise. Udit, what's your weakest signal?
Okay, well, my weakest signal is this new organizational structure that I came across on Twitter called Turtleocracy. So, have you guys heard of this?
No.
So it's been being trialed by this organization called Human Systems, which is run by this guy, Joe Edelman, who also coined the term time well spent and has been associated with like the digital well-being kind of movement and the Center for Humane Technology and that whole space. But the idea is basically turtleocracy is an alternative to democracy or sociocracy or any of the other kind of systems for decision making. And the main kind of philosophy is that there are three types of people in organizations: birds, rabbits, and turtles. And birds are the experts. Rabbits are the people with ideas and hot takes and are quite confident. And turtles are the people who aren't very confident and are okay to move very, very slowly and make decisions over long periods of time through experimentation. And so their philosophy is that in turtleocracy, that you want to empower turtles to make decisions instead of the birds and the rabbits. And the idea is that they're solving a few different kinds of problems, like they want to remove power from people with hot takes who are overly confident and kind of move fast. And also want to create space for more experimentation. So yeah, that's my weak signal. It's called turtleocracy.
Well, a turtle is somebody without strong ideas, but they're prepared to slowly experiment over years.
Over time, over years.
So like generally risk-averse people? Or?
Very, very risk-averse people who don't have strong ideas and have like difficulty making decisions about ideas in the moment. And so the idea would be turtleocracy would put turtles in the decision-making seat, and they would, over long periods of time, come up with the best decisions through experimentation. So the idea is that birds who are experts, although they might have strong expertise, they're not experimenters. And rabbits, who are people with a lot of ideas, don't take the time to think through their ideas properly. So to solve those two kinds of problems, turtles are, in their opinion, the best ways to make decisions. Turtles are equipped to make decisions best.
But wouldn't turtles kind of need bird and rabbit traits to succeed?
Yeah, so they're not saying that turtles and rabbits are not, rabbits and birds are not important, but it's just moving the decision-making powers more towards turtles as opposed to rabbits and birds. So you would still have an organization with rabbits and birds, but rabbits and birds are, in the past, rabbits and birds have been more empowered. And then we're going to change the dynamics within an organization to put turtles more in the driver's seat.
Yeah, because the world has been one that celebrates like grand conceptual innovations and ideas, I guess, as opposed to slowly experimented toward.
That's right. Anyway, do you guys think it's a signal? Is it noise? Is it important? Is it relevant?
Don't turtles lay like hundreds of eggs? Isn't that going to be a problem?
So there's going to be too many turtles?
Yeah, just suddenly, it's a turtle singularity.
It's turtles all the way down.
I've been
Or
telling
what if they just
them
mutate into like turtle rabbits or like turtle birds or
Teenage
you
Mutant
know
Ninja Turtles.
mutant species?
Yeah.
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 Hybrids.
And then everyone would have all the traits, and then it would just be, you know, a really, really great functioning organization.
I don't know. Do you want everyone to have all the traits?
That's true. I don't know. I guess it depends on like a mix of different traits in leadership positions. I don't know.
But I think the turtle, it does remind me of this idea, just that risk-taking has been celebrated. People like to identify as risk takers, or it's celebrated. But maybe it should not be at all. Like calculated risk is worthwhile, right? But which risk you're going to take? Taking all the risks is not any kind of good trait.
Mm-hmm.
It would make sense to me to some extent if it's like the turtles have ideas, it's just they're like weakly held, but they're strong ideas. Do you know that like idea of like, yeah, I think I just said it actually, strong ideas, weakly held.
Weakly held, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's actually, they think the way it's framed, or human systems kind of frames it, is that turtles actually don't have strong ideas at all and have no ideas. And the ideas are developed over time. And through periods of consultations with birds and rabbits, they gather the ideas and then actually work through them through experiments until they've developed a system that actually works. So I guess like the flaw that you're pointing out, Valdis, is that do we actually have people who have no ideas? Is that a thing? I don't know. I don't know if that's true. Like when I was reading it, I was like, I don't know if this is like a meaningful way of like actually defining archetypes within an organization at all. Like, I don't know if, like, when you ask me, do you think you're a rabbit or a turtle? It's hard for me to say because I see bits of all of these personalities in each one of us.
Yeah. But these things are never perfect.
They're not perfect, of course.
But
it depends on the problem you're trying to solve and like the context behind what you're doing.
I'm not clear what strong and weak ideas really means here. That's like the most confusing part of it. To me, I would interpret it as these, like, they don't have ideas. It actually means they have very abstract ideas. They have sort of outcomes in mind. They kind of have an idea of where they're headed, not how to get there. And that's the need for slow experimentation and like care and consideration about how to achieve something.
Yeah, so the way they start off is that they have like a question that's their like a question that they want to answer over time. So like, what is like, you know, the best relationship between society and technology, or like how do we define systems that are good, that are respectful and meaningful with technology? That could be a question, and then over time, over many years, they can find interesting and useful and meaningful solutions to those. But they don't start off with strong ideas of what solutions could look like right from the get-go. So I guess that's closer to what you said, Rob.
Yeah, sort of slow synthesis.
But do you think it's a signal for anything?
Yeah, I'm gonna go signal. Can we do signal or noise? I say signal. Macy?
I say signal.
Others?
Noise.
Nice, the contrarian.
Okay, what do you think it's a signal of, and why do you think it's noise?
I'll just signal first. So I hope it's a signal, and I'm willing to make it part of the future I try to create. So that's where I see it as a signal. It's a signal of changing value systems and how we think about decision making and leadership. So possibly leading to longer term thinking and things like in governance in general, in institutions and in government, that can hopefully lead to slower, better decisions around all the issues that we deal with, which I think is a good thing, instead of rushing to have things that maybe we shouldn't have. Like if we were to think of like something like an iPhone or whatever, it's very much not the work of turtles. Like we would not have this yet in a turtleocracy, I don't think, because there's just too many issues to work through that no one would go for it. So that's rabbit and bird food.
But I guess could you argue that like government organizational process and structure is like inherently turtle?
Yeah, you could definitely argue that.
Why would you say that, Macy? Like what you,
Because they are tasked to be risk adverse, and I think, although I think it comes down to like how do you define experimentation, and I think governments are increasingly trying to tap into the value of that, and maybe like take on a little bit of like the bird and rabbit responses, or like proactive responses.
mm-hmm.
But I think just given like the scale of the government system, and also just they are meant to be kind of the gatekeeper or the checker, like there is that inherent like gradual risk adverse approach.
Carlos, why do you think it's noise?
Well, it's not a very turtle-esque idea. It's a very strongly held idea. That, and which I think like actually like points to the, I'm just very skeptical of things that seem to come out of nowhere from above to shape things. Like I don't know what organization has like beta tested this notion of turtleocracy. I mean, it seems like there's interesting ideas. I just don't, I think like when we say it's a signal, like does this in and of itself like lead to anything? Like I would say probably not, because I'm kind of skeptical of these kinds of sales type pitches, you know, like the new system that's going to solve everything. It's like, is that the best way to go about it?
Yeah, I can see that one. Okay, let's move on. Macy, what's your weakest signal?
So I was looking at how recently two musicians, one a copyright lawyer, developed an algorithm to create essentially basically every possible melody, Western melody ever, and they copyrighted it and made it completely available to the public domain as a comment on the inadequacies of the copyright system, and to kind of show and or like mitigate those music copyright cases that are essentially like putting a chilling effect on creativity. So yeah, I'm curious to you guys' thoughts, both in terms of like AI and creation, and also in terms of, yeah, like the effectiveness of the copyright system. I know that's like such a overarchingly big question, but.
I mean, I would say signal off the bat. I mean, I'm running ahead. I know I'm supposed to do that later, but how do you possibly run through every system, every single melody in existence? Like,
so
what
they I guess,
you know,
they essentially deemed it as like basically every possible combination of the 8-note scale and like a 12-beat melody combination. So I think that's kind of like the basis of how they did it. So they quantified it that way. But they also like recognize that obviously some of the melodies that were generated have probably been copyrighted before. But I guess they really did it as an exercise, like to provoke conversations about possible copyright reform.
So, Macy, I have a question. Since you're a lawyer, maybe you can answer this. When you're copywriting a piece of music, what exactly are you copywriting? Like, are you copywriting the representation, like for example, like the sheet music, or are you copywriting like the actual like sounds?
So they're both. You can do both the sheet music and the sounds of it. And basically copyright is automatic. So whenever it's created and into a fixed form, is automatically copyrighted by the person that created that fixed form.
Because it's like when you were talking, the thing that came to mind is that, well, you could do like what these individuals did. Like you could do that with anything. Like I could do that with code too, right? Like I could.
For sure, yeah.
And like that's like, and actually like going back to like Alan Turing and like, you know, computation and like his ideas of like what is computable. Like, you know, the Turing machine, the idea of the Turing machine is like devising machine where everything that can compute anything that is computable, right? So the idea that came to my head is like, I'm wondering if you could just like write a little program on a Turing machine to generate all possible, you know, the entire like possibility space of everything that's computable, like all possible combinations of a Turing machine. Obviously, it's going to be the possibility space is infinite, but you could, and you could copyright that. So what does that do for software as well, right? Like, so I wonder at that point, does it just become meaningless? Like, does copyright become meaningless? And maybe that is the point you're trying to raise.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? And that's that's the tension. But then I think it's just like, especially where we are in Canada, like artistic works have been relegated into this like economic system where artists need to subscribe to the copyright system to make money. But are there other alternative ways to think beyond that? I guess what they're also trying to show is that if the copyright system is not balanced, it could be pushed to an extreme where it can be monopolized by specific individuals or like specific elites. And how do we like prevent that from happening? I mean, there are alternatives. There are like Creative Commons licenses, and they're like, that's why the public domain exists. But
isn't there like a Muzak type factory that's like already doing something like this, like algorithmically generated music? You go on like YouTube, you can find like 7 hours of like, you know, some given genre or whatever.
Yeah, it's a bit different.
Lo-fi study music.
Yeah, Juke Deck, I think, or something like that is one.
Yeah.
Program.
like as like stock samples, or
yeah, just generate. It uses AI or some narrow form of AI to generate background music that you can use in your videos or whatever, and you can input some moods and things like that.
What, and so is that copyrighted, Valdez? Do you know?
You can license those things.
Oh, you can license
It's like a free version, so and that you can get for free for certain uses, and then if you want it to be yours or whatever, you can copyright.
so then those tracks are owned by that company that is essentially running this business.
Yeah, I guess the problem really is like, how do you make money off of things in the, like, how is value created?
I'm going to go with noise because I think that's what's missing from the conversation. It's like, you can make these examples and as a conversation starter, okay, fine. Like these kinds of, this sort of project is good because there's flaws, but like at the end of the day, it comes down to like, how is value created? Have you created a work that is of value? And it's like, yeah, great, copyright all the pieces of music that are possibly made, but it's just never going to hold up. It's like, what's going to hold up is somebody created something, there's meaning for these reasons, it meets its cultural moment. Like all of those things go into the value of the composition, and that's what's going to end up being protected, I think, when it comes down to it. There's like a practicality, kind of human judgment that works, but the danger of the balance of power being tipped too far one way is a real one. So it's still important to have these kinds of projects and like to keep it. It's almost like this, it's so impossible to solve, but needs to be a continued conversation. And will continue to be. Yeah, because as soon as the conversation dies, it's like, then we're in trouble. But the conversation itself, it's very strange in that way. It's like you need to keep having these controversial cases and these sort of like artistic examples. At
the same time, someone could say what their project is essentially functioning as like a copyright troll that's, you know, amassing rights to all of these things. And if they didn't do it for the purpose of, you know, putting it to the public domain, then there could be lawsuits. Like if they had money and resources to enforce all of those rights within all of those melodies that were created, then it would really like restrict musicians who are actually putting in the artistic value into their works to create those works. Yeah, but it is broken. Like in the end, music is way more valuable to human life than the sort of like economy around it is. You know, it's like it's not going to go anywhere. These things, like this is sort of one dimension of it. And yes, the copyright system is not perfect, but there will always be different forms of piracy, and they will never stop us from singing happy birthday. That's a good note to end on that. Valdez?
The one I chose is it's a little older, from 2017, article in the Journal of Ecology and Evolution that was done by a few landscape architects out of the GSD, the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And they had this idea of designing autonomy inside of new wilderness spaces. So instead of rewilding, think of like new wilding. And what they mean by that is that a lot of the time when we talk about rewilding, what we're talking about is actually increasing human intervention into landscapes in order to undo some of the effects of past human involvement. So when you're rewilding, you're actually taking a more active role in managing the landscape, because you have to kind of remove past traces that we've left, pollution and things like that. And so the idea that they have is that instead of having this kind of nostalgic vision of like a pristine wilderness that we can restore, why not think about what the hybrid forms of like increased human intervention and increased like non-human capabilities are within a given space? And what questions are raised when you think about this design space, right? So one of the things they raise is the issue of like, how do you design a system that's designed to like actively remove human traces from it? What would that mean? What are the ethical implications, right? If you think of like an exclusion zone for people, and the system's designed to like optimize the removal of like a given harmful mineral or bring it into balance or something like that, what are the ethical implications for people in that scenario? That wasn't the best example, I realized halfway through.
Do they have specific examples that they give?
Yeah, like, I mean, I think I didn't.
What this looks like.
Yeah, I mean, so the analog, so not an example, but the analog would be self-driving cars, and they're thinking around systems that really are about reinforcement learning, that are kind of begin with a set of inputs and then have a set of goals and parameters that adjust to meet the desired outputs and whatnot. So some of the examples they mentioned are like underwater robots that are being used to like kill these invasive starfishes, which is kind of a wild idea that's happening to save the coral reefs in Australia. Drone reseeders, so using drones to seed forests. Virtual fences that help keep animals from moving into like more dangerous human occupied zones, and different kinds of like toxic cleanup robots and whatnot.
Like in taking an active role in like engineering ecologies.
Yeah, and engineering wildness, like sort of meaning non-human involvement.
And so like it's like the opposite of kind of like the half-earth type of like ideas, right? Which would just be like very passive. Let's just like contain and quarantine like half the earth.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily actually opposed to half Earth. It depends on what state you're leaving that other half of the Earth in, you know? Like if you're leaving it a totally sterile dead zone, then that's probably not the vision that Wilson has. So the half Earth proposal is like that we should leave half of the Earth just to its own devices and not allow humans into it, because that's the fastest way for a given ecosystem to recover. I think the spirit of half Earth could fit with this idea. That's what I'm getting at. The fastest way for a system to recover might not be to just flee and abandon it. Right. It might be to like remediate a given toxin out of the soil so that plants can actually grow.
I think it's a signal, because I think we need to take an active role in shaping the world around us right now. And there are certain things that are happening, like including COVID, including climate change, that are not going to be contained if we take a passive role. And so like the signal really here is that human involvement is necessary for the outcomes we want, right? And we can't leave, we've messed up the earth already so badly that we have to like make an effort to improve things. So I would say signal.
What do you guys think?
It's all gardening to me. I'll say signal. I'm still a little bit caught up on how it's exactly like where this begins and rewilding ends. I guess I would have thought that this would have been included under the same umbrella.
I think the notion is in rewilding, there's at least an assumption that you are restoring a system to a past state, whereas I don't think this one necessarily has that assumption. There might be, and this is where it gets speculative, like situations that have never existed that like, you know, again, it depends on how you define the parameters, but that increase like non-human flourishing in a way that didn't exist before, you know? That's the part that's like a little more speculative. That's like,
So they're essentially like creating potential new wildness.
yeah, new wildness. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. But so I guess there's like, I almost see like three categories here. I don't know if this is like the framework, but like rewilding as like this restore something. This we could call like new wilding, as you put it. And then a third would be this like let it wild, because things become wild again, right? Like you destroy life makes its way back, which could also be new, right? It's just like without any human influence or whatever.
But that's essentially like the half Earth thing, right?
Yeah.
But I would say like the point that's being made here, which I think I agree with, is that humans are fundamentally part of the ecology, right? And like thinking or like being like thinking that this idea that we can remove ourselves from nature in some sense is just like a flawed idea to begin with. That's a flawed premise. And we must always think of ourselves as part of the ecological makeup of the earth, right? So if that's the case, if we are definitely part of the ecological makeup of the earth, then how do we, position ourselves to be actually making it better? Like
how is it different in agriculture then?
Yeah. And there's also no knowing whether that like new wildness is better or worse though, right?
Okay, so how is it different from agriculture? It's not different from agriculture once you understand that agriculture is also part of, like changing the ecological makeup of the earth, which I think people are realizing now. And like, I think that's a new idea, relatively speaking, right?
Yeah, I guess so. That's really hard to say actually, but yeah, but okay, let's accept that.
I would say it's different than agriculture in the sense that you could easily think of different kinds of measures that, I mean, all of this comes down to measurement, right? Because you're talking about how do you basically use computation to think about managing landscapes. And when you do that, you have to think about how do you measure different indices for what counts as flourishing or not, and then you're in the problem of like, what can numbers really tell you, and there are questions there around what that means that I think this project brings up at least. But I could easily imagine instead of, so agriculture like optimizes for like calorie yield, right? There are many other things you could optimize a system for, right? So you could optimize it for biodiversity, you could optimize it for different like species sizes within it. You know what I mean? Like you could find all sorts of different numbers and kind of play with that. And I think this project's saying kind of like, we don't even have to, part of this self-reinforcement system is that maybe we could even put into place systems that find new ways of measuring and new ways of thinking about what this flourishing is, ones that maybe like surprise us the way that like the Go player surprised us,
Signal.
Yeah, I'm convinced.
I have possibly the same signal, I'm not sure. So, CRISPR was used to build what they're saying is dual core computers inside human cells. This was researchers in Zurich who building functional biocomputers. And I'm trying to understand exactly how much metaphor or conceptual analogy this is. But they say they're slotting dual core processors into human cells. One of the quotes from one of the scientists involved in the project says, imagine a micro tissue with billions of cells equipped with its own dual core processor. So I'm trying to understand or ask here, what does it mean for the potential for computing power and energy efficiency? Will we one day be working with these kinds of living computers to do our everyday computing or our not so everyday computing, our supercomputing?
I feel like I have to look to Udit.
I have a question about why the signal is dual core specifically. Like, even if you had said it was single core, I'd be like, oh, that's really interesting to begin with. But dual core is just like such a specific.
Yeah, it's very strange. I thought that too. Isn't this going to be like, isn't the fact that it's in a living being make it efficient enough? Like, why do you need it to make it dual core?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering now, was there like a previous paper about the first CRISPR computational cell that came out like a few months ago or a year ago or something that we missed?
Maybe need to understand. What would be the advantage of dual core processing? Would be what here? In general,
dual core means there are two different threads, computational threads that can be occurring at the same time, right?
Right.
Like the two different algorithms that can be running simultaneously in parallel.
So it's faster and more efficient.
essentially.
to do some calculations or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can say it's faster, and it can manipulate two sets of variables and numbers separately. What are the implications of it? Without knowing how much, like what the energy efficiency is for this, like it's hard to say like if it's actually more energy efficient or not, but you can imagine a world where it might be more energy efficient just because human cells are more energy, are possibly some of the most energy efficient computational systems that exist, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The other question that I have is when they say dual core, it suddenly puts it into the framing of our standard computational systems, right? So I'm wondering if it's like a von Neumann type of architecture or like a standard like computational architecture, which is again interesting because the thing that I find interesting about biological computation is that it's biological. It doesn't use the same architecture that we use digitally, which von Neumann himself would say it's not very efficient to begin with. It was developed to work really well for calculating ballistic trajectories from missiles and things like that, right? But so yes, yeah. So my question for like a biological computational device is like, how does it actually work? Is it based on our current digital architectures, or is it something new and something uniquely biological?
I get the sense that it is an attempt to mimic our sort of existing computation structures, that it's coming out of the synthetic biology world and kind of looking to engineer like things like circuits, right? That's my sense of it, which in that way less interesting, I guess, than a new type of computation, which is, I guess, something we've been discussing a little bit around what that could look like. What new models of computation can be learned from the natural world?
To me, I think the thing that it would signal is like our proficiency in like engineering structures within the cell, and not actually anything in terms of like our computational capabilities, because I don't think those have really changed fundamentally in this experiment. But this is all without reading the paper. It's just a guess. Yeah. What do you guys think?
I'm like trying to figure out, I guess, how it works all together.
Yeah.
And like the different pieces, like what is the details around like CRISPR, and like obviously they're using a DNA or RNA or something, right?
And what are the outputs?
My guess would be it's like the input, both the input and output is like some protein that it's like.
So it's just like modeling kind of basically like circuitry, like digital circuitry for like bioprocessing.
Well, I haven't read the paper, but like off the top of my head, I would guess that they have represented digital information in terms of proteins, and this is like a little computational system within a cell that works with these proteins to manipulate the information that's being represented in the form of proteins.
I think that's right. Let me read you guys something. Likely we will cut this off later. By enabling rational programming of mammalian cell behavior, synthetic biology is driving innovation across biomedical applications. Using Cas9 variants as protein-based central processing units, CPUs, that control gene expression in response to single guide RNAs as genetic software, we have programmed scalable Boolean logic computations such as the half adder in single human cells. Combining orthogonal Cas9 variants enabled the design of multi-core genetic CPUs that provide parallel arithmetic computations. The Cas9-based multi-core CPU design may provide opportunities in single-cell mammalian biocomputing to provide biomedical applications.
Are they going to make a GPU?
That's nice.
Well, you could
play some games.
We could do folding at home to folding within the body.
The citizen science type of thing, right? I wonder if they're doing anything with the virus actually right now, COVID.
Yeah.
That style. I don't know if they need.
Oh yeah, you can donate your computer cycles or your CPU cycles for COVID research right now. I think the folding at home team is working on that right now.
That makes sense. Yeah. The other thing about this example that I think about is like how much do we want to use the metaphor of like the body as a computer to think through what the body does. And I don't know enough either, like from not having read the article to know and not know. And I don't think actually that's even the point, but I think it inevitably raises like the question of like, how do we think about how the body's made up, and is it like fundamentally computational at its like core level, right? Are like cells just communicating one to one to one to one in a computational form of logic, or are there other forms of logic that are going on? I know that sounds like kind of esoteric, but von Neumann, who was mentioned earlier, has like also thought about the question of whether other forms of logic might exist inside of natural systems.
I think there's a lot of assumption within the bioscientists who work on stuff like this that the human body is itself a large computer. It's hard to know if that's just like an explanation, though, that gets made, that people really understand well the nuances of how it's different. And beyond this is sort of like there's input from the outside world that gets processed and so on.
Yeah.
The one thing about it being modeled after like our standard computational architectures is that, you know, all the knowledge that we've created within computer science in the last 50 years, you can suddenly apply to this, right? So all these algorithms that we've created are suddenly transportable inside the human body, which is, you know, in some ways very, very valuable. So that's the benefit of, you know, building this computational system within the human body that's based off standard architectures.
I can't wait to get my first Heart 404.
Okay.
Yeah.
Broadcast from later. Signing up.